This is episode 51 of the Why Not Me podcast, the Personality Blueprint Part 2, MBTI. I'm your host, Anita Bremer. I'm a wife, mom, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a life coach. And I believe when you know who you are, you can be the best you at what you're called to do. This requires faith, wisdom, and mental wellness. That's what we talk about here. Okay, so it's a couple days after Christmas, and I'm kind of in that fog of what day is it and what do I need to do? And so I'm feeling a little bit sluggish and like I've had too much sugar the past couple days, which is probably true. So I'll try to, keep this upbeat and interactive as much as possible, but right now, I feel like I'm just at work and I gotta hammer it out. And sometimes that's what we have to do, right? Last episode, I introduced the personality blueprint and we talked about Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies. If that episode was a little bit too long for you, I have good news. This one should be a bit shorter because Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies is short enough that I could give more detailed explanation in one longer episode. But today we're going to talk about the Myers Briggs Type Inventory, and it is just too many details, too thick, too involved that I'm going to have to really give you the 30,000-foot view of it, which means that it'll probably be a bit shorter of an episode. So just as a reminder, or in case you haven't listened to the last episode, I have this idea that I'm calling the personality blueprint to take 6 different tools. They're not all personality tools, but they all help you discover a little bit more of who you are, why you tick, how you tick, those kinds of things. And I haven't finalized all the details yet, but I'm turning this into a coaching package because I think that so often we don't actually pause to figure out, who am I? I call it sort of like the default wiring of our personalities and our identities. We just are kind of, dumped into life and into relationships and into, the pluses and the minuses to life. And we are trying to swim. But if we can get out of the water and figure out, who am I? How do I want to do this? How do I want to navigate this? It makes life a bit easier. At least it does in my point of view. So this is kind of the purpose behind the personality blueprint. And the first tool was Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies that has to do with discovering how you respond to expectation and honestly, how the people around you respond to expectation. And today we're talking about the MBTI, or Myers Briggs Type Inventory. And it has kind of a longer history. This is started by Carl Jung, one of the well-known names in the psychology world, and then was brought to life as a way to make his thoughts about people and their personalities and the different facets of their personalities more useful. And I should have looked up the actual names, but it's a mother-daughter combination. Isabel Briggs Meyer, I think, is the daughter's name. And then the mother's last name was Meyer. So you can totally just do a Google search. It is one of the most well-known kind of in the realm of personality type systems or tests, although it's not really a test. And it helps you understand yourself. And honestly, if you can get the people around you to take the inventory, it helps you understand them as well. And is specifically on a few different factors. So I'm going to get into that in a minute. But first, I wanted to talk about how this has helped me. And this is, I think, the first tool that I came across and learned to apply to myself and to really use it to help me understand myself and to really stack my life in a way that works for me. So I did a deep dive and I learned all about my type. I am an ISFJ. And And then I started to kind of turn around and look at my husband and my kids. And being an ISFJ, that means that I'm an introvert, um, sensor, F is feeler, and J is judger. We're going to get into what all those words mean. But one of the things is that last letter, that judger, which on the outside makes it like if you were looking at me and looking at my life, you would see that I like things to be pretty organized and kind of have systems and rules and things like that. Well, I was talking to my oldest daughter, and this is like probably almost 10 years ago now. She was 8 or 9 years old at the time. Maybe she was 10, somewhere around there. She was old enough that she was having her own personality come to light and able to kind of be in conversation with me about it. And I'm a pretty extreme J. So each of these letter combinations is on a continuum. And for me, that last letter, that judger letter, it's pretty extreme. Like it's not middle of the road. It's like very extreme judger for me. And as I was talking to my daughter, I realized that she was a pretty extreme P, which is the opposite letter. And it just clicked something in my mind. I realized that I like rules. Rules make me feel safe. I like things to be orderly. This is how I interact with the world, is like having things be sort of decided and, closed and that kind of thing. But she really, one of her values is freedom and leaving things open ended. And the rules kind of like make her feel stifled. And in that moment, when I realized that, it just made so much sense. We had always had kind of a confrontational relationship. And it was a moment where I realized that this tool was really helping me understand my daughter in a way that I could then relate to her, that made it easier for both of us. And after that, I went on to try to type my younger two. And this has been a little bit of a process. They were younger at the time. And so I kind of had to wait a few years. But I basically have learned over time that both my second daughter and my son are the same type as me. Now, like each letter is on a continuum. So there's some nuance there, but it helped me see why I got along more easily with my middle child and with my youngest, and not as easily with my oldest, because of this one dynamic in our personalities that tends to sort of ruffle feathers in one another. So I'm just using that as an example of when you understand these things about yourself, if you're open to it, and I totally understand how some people don't believe it or they don't want to be, quote unquote, put in a box. For me, it doesn't feel like that at all. It feels like information about myself. And I never feel like, oh, this tool or this test or whatever is telling me about me. I always retain that agency of I know the most about who I am and what I am. And I just use these tools as more of like a jumping off point of a description and language around different dynamics and, personality ways of being, I guess is how I would say it. So I don't ever let the tests or the types or the systems themselves tell me I am this or I am that. I just take it as like, oh, this helps me understand myself. It helps give language to how I view myself, but I don't make it be like the end all be all. So that's kind of how I get around that. But I know a lot of people have lots of strong thoughts and feelings about those things. So just as a very high level overview, and I will put a bunch of links in the show notes to, if you've never taken the test, a couple places where you can take the test. And if you want to understand, if you've taken the test and you know what your letters are, you want to understand it more, I'll give some links to that. But just as a really overview for now, I'm going to talk about each of the letter combinations and what they mean. But I just want to sort of give a caveat that the Myers Briggs type indicator is not So it's not a test. It's not like you answer questions and there's a right or a wrong. It's you, you determine, you answer what feels most like you. And the letter combinations, which one comes first, second, third, fourth, matter. So it's not just the sum, it's the concept of the sum of the parts is greater, right? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts kind of thing. So just that, because as I was researching, there's so much that even I don't really know about that hasn't been compelling for me to learn. I just kind of know this very surface level. And then as I have taken people through my personality blueprint, I've learned more about other types as well. And the part that I come in as a coach is helping you see your personality, yourself, these little bits and pieces of you, the description of them at least, as like, how can I use this to my advantage? Right. And so everybody's going to come at it at an individual level, but I really want to make clear that I am not an expert. I'm not a Myers Briggs coach of any sort. And they're like, you can actually get that certification. I just am somebody who loves learning about these things and have used it for myself to understand myself and my family a little better. And it goes very deep. So it's an online rabbit hole that you can follow if you feel so inspired. And I will again include some of those links in the show notes. Okay, so the first letter in the MBTI, which is the official name of this framework, the first letter is extrovert versus introvert. It's probably the letter that most people think they know what it means. But this is a very like clinical psychology point of view. So even if you know kind of in layman's terms, introvert versus extrovert, it might not be exactly what you're thinking of. We tend to associate this with like shyness or quietness, and they are not the same thing. Extroverts are people who get their energy from being with other people, right? So being out in the world with other people is like what fuels you. And it's where you kind of put your focus in this sense. Okay, so according to one site that I went to, it talks about your favorite world. Extroverts, their favorite world is the outer world, and introverts, their favorite world is their own inner world. And it's also where you tend to put most of your focus, and it's also where you get fueled or like you get your energy from. So if you're an introvert like me, I get refueled, re-energized by spending time in solitary type activities, by thinking about, in my inner world. And extroverts are the opposite. They get fueled and like even refueled. Like I tend to think of it in terms, just me personally, when I'm with a group of people or out in the world, in my outer world, it feels draining to me. But when I'm in my inner world, it doesn't feel like it drains me. So that's the extrovert versus introversion. And then the second set of the 4 letters, every Myers Briggs type has 4 letters. So the first is either E or I for extrovert or introvert. The second letter is going to be either sensing or intuition. It's going to be represented by an S for sensing or N for intuition. And the reason is because intuition starts with an I, but the I is already taken for introversion. So it's an S or an N. And it talks about like, how do you take in information? Do you prefer to focus on the basic information you take in, or do you prefer to interpret and add meaning to the information? So if you're a sensor like me, you focus on the actual facts and the basic information. And if you fall under the category more of intuitive, then you tend to take in information from your senses, but then interpret and add meaning to it. The third letter, and I will say before I move on to the third letter, that I feel like the sensing, intuitive, um, continuum is the hardest to understand, like how it plays out in your real life. It has more to do with like how the letters work with each other, which I'm not probably going to get to on this podcast. Okay, so the third letter is either T or F for thinking or feeling. And this letter indicates how you make decisions. When making decisions, do you prefer to first look at logic and consistency, or first to look at the people or the special circumstances? So if you're fall under the thinking end of the spectrum, you're probably looking at logic and like basically taking all the the personal meaning out of it. You're just like strictly the facts kind of thing. And if you fall under the end of the feeler, then you're probably thinking about the people and how something affects people and how it feels. Okay. So I think that one's pretty straightforward. Like, I think in our world today, and we're becoming more aware, we kind of understand that difference between thinking and feeling. The feeling does not indicate emotion. It doesn't indicate if you're like an emotional person. It just indicates like how do you base your decisions? So that's something to keep in mind. And the fourth letter is going to be either a J or a P. J for judging, and it doesn't have anything to do with being judgmental, or P for perceiving. This is the letter that I was talking about a minute or two ago with my daughter. I'm a J, a judger, and she's a P, she's a perceiver. So this talks about how you structure your world in dealing with the outside world. So this is particularly your outside world, not your inner world. And I'll come back to that in a second. When dealing with the outside world, do you prefer to get things decided, or do you prefer to stay open to new information and options? So judgers tend to want things to be decided and to like have an order to them. And perceivers tend to want to stay open to new information and experiences and options and like leave things open-ended. So oftentimes this looks like, because again, this is dealing with your outer world, when you see somebody that likes to make lists and like to-do lists and have things sort of orderly, and their worlds are, fairly organized, they're probably a judger, because that's how they structure their outer world. Their inner world might not feel or look like that. They might have an inner world that they stay very open to ideas and things like that. So this is specifically with the outer world. And if you are a perceiver, you might be described as like somebody who flies by the seat of their pants or loves to be spontaneous, right? That's kind of that part in you that wants to leave things open and have, new options and new information coming at you. So that is kind of an overview of the Myers Briggs Type Inventory and what each of the letters means. Now, it gets a lot more complicated, like I mentioned before, because, for example, if you're a J or a P, judger or perceiver, that will tell you judgers use their T or F, the thinker feeler, and it doesn't matter if you're a thinker or a feeler, but they use that part of them, that decision-making part, they use that more in the outer world. So a lot of this is like outer world versus inner world as well. And there's like, your primary type and your secondary type and your tertiary type and then your minor type. So it's like these four sort of interactions between the different letters. So because there are four letters, four types for each person, there ends up being 16 personality types. And one of the websites you can go to is actually called 16personalities.com. You can take a free test there. You can get an overview. There's a lot of information online, obviously, to help you understand these things. But 4 to the fourth power is 16. Is that true? No, it's not 4 to the fourth power. It's 4 times 4, right? So there are 16 different types, the way these letters can shake out, right? You can be ESTJ or ESFJ or ESFP, right? So you can see that it creates a lot of letter combinations. So there's 16 of them, and each one is slightly different. It has a different feel or energy, but you can also look at, like, if you're an E and a J or an I and a P, right? Or you can look at S and T or S and F. So it does get a lot more nuanced. I just don't feel qualified to really go into those details in this podcast, but it is one of the tools that I use as I walk my clients through the personality blueprint. And a lot of this is work that you do on your own. You take the test on your own, and we come together to help you understand, how does this play out in your real life? And how, like, do you have some shame over something? For example, my family tells me that I'm kind of a stick in the mud, and like I never want to participate in things. And I used to really have a lot of shame about that. I used to say, like, oh, I should want to do this and I should want to do that. And why can't I get myself to do XYZ, whatever. And over the years, part of this is just, maturing into myself. But I think really understanding my Myers Briggs type has helped me to drop some of that shame and just say, oh, this is just how I am. Like, why would I fight against it? Instead, now I just go, yeah, I know. And you might not like it, but that's who I am. And that's what I like. Right. And then usually my family drops it pretty fast. Like, they might bring it up every time we go on vacation or do something fun together. And I'm the one on the sidelines, taking the pictures or whatever. And they're like, Mom, come on. And I do involve myself sometimes, but oftentimes, especially if we're doing something, like, I have a daughter who loves things like bungee jumping or skydiving, like, that's just not for me. In fact, years ago, we went to Universal Studios in Florida, and my daughter really wanted to ride one of the roller coasters, and nobody wanted to ride it with her. And I felt bad. And so I said, fine, I'll ride it for you, even though I never ride roller coasters. I hate roller coasters. They give me instant migraine headaches. Like, there's several reasons why I don't like roller coasters. But that day I was just feeling especially generous. And so I got in line with her and I rode the roller coaster. And sure enough, immediately I had a blaring headache, and like the rest of the day was not as much fun for me. And so I just know this about myself now, like certain things that I just don't allow myself to do because the benefit does not outweigh the negative side of things, right? And part of this has to do with my personality. A lot of it does. And sometimes it's just my preferences. But as I've learned more, like, my sort of innate wiring, I've been able to drop some of the shame about how I view myself. So that's kind of the type of thing we do in the coaching relationship. Is most of, you figuring out what the tool is, you doing that on your own. And then we bring it to the coaching relationship and kind of dig into, like, how do you think or feel about this? Where is it confusing? Where do you feel like it doesn't fit? What questions do you have? And then I coach you through those things. So, and not every tool is going to be like that, where you pretty much do it on your own. There are a couple tools that I am a lot more involved as the coach. But yeah, if learning about these personality factors is intriguing to you, you'll definitely be interested in my personality blueprint. I haven't finalized all the details yet. Like, I've taken a few people through, a couple people for free, to kind of test it out and figure out what the best sort of way to do it is. And then I have taken a couple of my clients as a bonus through, and it's still evolving as we go, and I'm open to feedback and things, but it's something fun that I enjoy learning about and enjoy sharing with others. So if you want to know, once the details are finalized, follow me on Instagram or join my email list, and you'll be the first to know. That's enough for now, and so are you. If this episode made you think about yourself or others in a new way, would you please give it a rating and a review? And if you want to truly do the work of being the best you at what you do, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free session with me. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.